Clara Hawthorne was the golden child of her family, kind, bright, and loved by everyone. Her cousin, Damon Wells, was the opposite, angry, reckless, and drowning in secrets. When Clara decided to confront him about his lies, she never imagined it would cost her life. What happened next became one of the most sickening cases Brenton had ever seen. Stay with us as we uncover how a family bond turned into betrayal, and how Damon tried to hide Clara in a way that horrified even seasoned detectives. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe for more chilling true crime stories, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the darkest cases we cover. The Hawthorne family had always carried a reputation for closeness, the kind of family that never missed a Sunday dinner and always showed up for each other's milestones. In the small town of Brenton, they were almost seen as a model of unity. Clara Hawthorne was the shining example of what many parents in town wished their children could become. At 23, she was bright, ambitious, and full of energy. She worked at the local library, tutored high school students after hours, and volunteered at the community center. She had a warmth that made people feel comfortable around her, the kind of personality that seemed rare in a world that often felt cold. Her cousin, Damon Wells, was nothing like her. Only 2 years older, he had grown up under the same family gatherings and traditions, but while Clara embraced them, Damon drifted away. People in Brenton often whispered about him, about the fights he had gotten into at bars, the unpaid debts, the reckless behavior that left him bouncing from job to job. Some chalked it up to bad luck, others to laziness, but everyone seemed to agree on one thing: Damon was troubled. Still, he was family, and in the Hawthornes' world, family was not something you turned your back on. Clara had always tried to believe Damon could turn things around. For years, she defended him when relatives made sharp remarks. She reminded everyone that he was still young, that he just needed a chance to prove himself. But over time, even her patience began to thin. Damon's bad decisions weren't just hurting him anymore, they were starting to pull others down too. He borrowed money from Clara, promising to pay it back quickly. Instead, the weeks turned to months, and the excuses piled up. When she pressed him for repayment, he avoided her calls. When she showed up at his apartment, he brushed her off with half-truths and hollow promises. Behind closed doors, Clara began to confide in close friends about her frustration. She said Damon's behavior had gone beyond carelessness, it felt manipulative. He seemed to rely on her kindness, knowing she wouldn't let him sink, but offering nothing in return. It was more than just the money. It was the feeling that her cousin no longer saw her as family, but as someone he could use whenever life got too heavy. She had reached her breaking point and made it clear to him that things couldn't go on this way. By the spring of that year, Clara was determined to confront him one last time. She told friends she planned to give Damon an ultimatum: pay back the debt or she would expose his gambling and lies to the rest of the family. To Clara, it wasn't about shaming him, it was about forcing him to face the truth before it destroyed him. But to Damon, who already felt judged by the world and cornered by his failures, her threat was something far darker. He saw it as betrayal, as humiliation waiting to happen, and that thought consumed him. What the family didn't realize as they sat around the dinner table, laughing and reminiscing, was that beneath the surface, a storm was quietly brewing between the two cousins. Clara believed she was about to put an end to years of manipulation. Damon, however, was already planning how to silence her once and for all. The night Clara disappeared began like any other in Brenton, but for those closest to her, it would become a date they could never forget. It was late on a Friday evening, rain falling steadily across the quiet town, when Clara left her apartment for what she told a friend would be a short meeting. She was going to see Damon, the cousin who had become the source of her frustration. She wanted to settle things once and for all, to finally put an end to the conflict between them. To her friends, it sounded like an act of courage. To Clara, it was something she felt she had to do. She believed that honesty and directness could fix what had been broken, even if it meant saying things Damon didn't want to hear. But Clara never returned home. The next morning, when she failed to show up for her shift at the library, her co-workers grew concerned. Clara was the kind of person who never missed work, never ignored her responsibilities, and never left people guessing about her whereabouts. Calls to her phone went unanswered, messages remained unread. By the afternoon, friends began checking her apartment. Her car was still in its usual spot, her bag and keys were inside, and her phone rested on the kitchen counter. Nothing suggested she had planned to be gone for long, and yet she had vanished without explanation. Her family was notified quickly. Panic spread among the Hawthornes, who were unaccustomed to crisis and unprepared for the idea that Clara could be in danger. Police were called that evening, and an investigation began almost immediately. Officers retraced her final steps, looking for anyone who might have seen her that night. It didn't take long for them to discover that Damon was the last person she had spoken to. When questioned, Damon told investigators he had picked her up but dropped her back at her apartment around 10 p.m. He claimed the meeting was short, a conversation that ended without incident, and insisted he had gone straight home afterward. At first, there was little to contradict him. But detectives were unsettled by his calmness. For a man who was supposedly worried about his missing cousin, Damon showed little urgency, little fear, and very little willingness to help. In the days that followed, the search for Clara intensified. Volunteers combed through fields, woods, and abandoned buildings. Flyers with her picture appeared in shop windows, on telephone poles, and across social media. Brenton, a town where little ever happened, was suddenly thrust into a nightmare. Every passing day without answers deepened the fear that something terrible had happened. Still, the pieces of the puzzle refused to fit. Damon's story didn't align with Clara's habits. Why would she leave her phone behind? Why would her car remain untouched? The unanswered questions piled up, and with them came suspicion. Investigators quietly began to shift their focus. Damon was no longer just the cousin she had gone to meet. He was quickly becoming the prime suspect in her disappearance. For nearly 2 weeks, the search for Clara consumed the town of Brenton. Her face was everywhere, on posters, in news reports, and across social media feeds. Vigils were held in front of the library where she worked, candles flickering in the night as friends and strangers prayed for answers. The longer she remained missing, the more desperate the community became. Behind the scenes, detectives worked tirelessly, retracing every possible step, interviewing anyone who might have crossed paths with her, and focusing more closely on Damon. His story had cracks, and investigators were determined to widen them. The breakthrough came when detectives obtained security footage from cameras positioned along a remote service road on the edge of town. At around 3 in the morning, Damon's truck was captured driving toward an abandoned grain mill, a place that had long been avoided since it fell into decay years ago. What unsettled investigators most was that Damon had told them he was home asleep by that time. The footage told another story entirely. It was the lead they had been waiting for. When officers arrived at the mill, they were met with silence and the heavy smell of dampness that clung to the rotting walls. Rusted machinery stood like skeletons in the shadows, relics of another time. At first glance, nothing seemed out of place, just another forgotten structure left to rot. But as they combed through the building, their eyes landed on something strange, a wall of hay bales stacked far too neatly for an abandoned site. Curiosity turned to dread when they pushed them aside and found a large, rusted animal trough tucked into the darkness. The trough looked unnatural. Its surface was filled with hardened cement, the edges smoothed as if someone had taken time to make sure it looked complete. Investigators immediately knew this was more than an odd discovery. They called in forensic experts to examine it further. As chisels and hammers chipped away at the cement, the grim reality emerged. Encased inside the solid block was the body of Clara Hawthorne. She had been entombed in concrete, hidden away in one of the most disturbing attempts to conceal a crime the detectives had ever seen. The discovery shook even the most experienced officers. It wasn't just murder, it was the way Damon had gone about hiding her. The deliberate effort, the cold calculation to buy cement, haul it into this decaying building, and pour it over her body spoke of a mind intent on erasing her existence. Clara wasn't simply killed, she was buried in a way meant to ensure no one would ever find her. News of the discovery spread through Brenton like wildfire. The image of a young woman, once so full of life, sealed in concrete by her own cousin left the community horrified. People who had once defended Damon as just troubled or misunderstood now saw him in a new light. He was no longer the reckless cousin or the black sheep of the family. He was a killer who had committed one of the most sickening acts imaginable. The grim discovery at the grain mill was only the beginning. Once Clara's body was recovered, the investigation shifted into overdrive. Detectives worked carefully, collecting every possible shred of evidence from the scene. The hardened concrete, though intended to keep her hidden, told its own story. Traces of Damon's fingerprints were found on the tools left behind. Fibers from the blanket wrapped around Clara's body matched ones later seized from Damon's apartment. Every detail painted a picture of planning and calculation, stripping away any chance that her death could be explained away as an accident. Forensic teams began piecing together a timeline. Damon's truck, captured on surveillance footage, was not just seen near the grain mill. Other cameras confirmed he had stopped at a hardware store hours before Clara disappeared. Receipts retrieved from the store showed purchases of multiple bags of cement, a metal trough, and heavy-duty gloves. The timestamp matched the evening Clara was last seen. Investigators knew immediately that this was premeditated. He hadn't panicked and hidden her body on impulse. He had gone shopping for the materials to entomb her before she was even reported missing. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Damon tried to craft excuses. He claimed Clara's death was a terrible accident, insisting she fell and hit her head during an argument. According to him, he panicked and chose the worst possible way to hide what happened. But the sheer weight of the facts destroyed his version of events. Experts explained that the effort required to mix and pour such a large quantity of cement meant hours of labor. This was not the action of someone acting in fear or confusion. This was methodical, deliberate, and deeply disturbing. Further analysis revealed concrete dust embedded in the soles of Damon's boots and tiny specks in the fibers of his truck's carpet. Investigators found scratches inside the bed of the vehicle, consistent with hauling heavy bags of cement and moving the trough. Blood traces, nearly invisible to the naked eye, were discovered beneath the truck's liner. Everything pointed to the same conclusion: Clara's body had been transported in Damon's vehicle before being hidden away. In court, the prosecution presented their case with devastating clarity. The receipts, the surveillance footage, the forensic matches, it all converged to tell the story of a man who had murdered his own cousin and gone to grotesque lengths to cover it up. Jurors listened in silence as crime scene photographs were shown, their expressions tightening with each new revelation. Even seasoned courtroom reporters later admitted the evidence was among the most chilling they had ever witnessed. The defense tried to cling to the idea of an accident, suggesting Damon's troubled background and emotional instability led him to make reckless decisions. But the jury was unmoved. It was impossible to look at the receipts, the trough of cement, the careful concealment, and see anything but intent. Damon's plan may have been crude, but it was undeniably purposeful. He had tried to erase Clara from existence, and in doing so, left behind a trail of evidence that could not be ignored. The trial of Damon Wells became the most closely followed case Brenton had ever seen. Every day, the courthouse was filled with townspeople, journalists, and family members who sat in silence as the horrific details unfolded. For the Hawthornes, attending was an act of both duty and agony. They wanted justice for Clara, but it meant reliving the nightmare again and again, hearing how she had been trapped, killed, and hidden away by someone who had once sat at their dinner table. The betrayal was unbearable. When the jury finally deliberated, there was little suspense. The mountain of evidence was overwhelming, and the defense's claim of an accident had collapsed under the sheer weight of forensic proof. It took less than a day for the jury to return with a guilty verdict. Damon was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The words rang out in the courtroom, final and definitive, yet the family found little comfort in them. Clara was still gone, and no sentence, no matter how harsh, could bring her back. For Clara's parents, the pain was layered. They had lost their daughter in the most brutal way imaginable, and on top of that, they were forced to grapple with the fact that the person responsible was a blood relative. Holidays and family gatherings were permanently fractured. What was once a family bound by love was now a family haunted by suspicion and grief. Relatives who had once defended Damon as troubled or misunderstood now fell into silence, unable to reconcile the young man they had known with the killer who had cemented Clara's body into a trough. Outside the family, the town of Brenton struggled to move on. It was a place where people had once left their doors unlocked and trusted their neighbors without question. The crime shattered that illusion. Parents warned their children to be careful, conversations at diners lingered on the case, and for months, the abandoned grain mill became a symbol of everything dark and unthinkable that had happened. Even years later, people would still glance toward it uneasily, remembering what had been found inside its rotting walls. The trial also left an indelible mark on those who had worked the case. Detectives admitted privately that it was one of the most disturbing acts of concealment they had ever encountered. The methodical way Damon attempted to erase his cousin from existence lingered in their minds. Forensic experts, hardened by years of exposure to grisly crime scenes, confessed that seeing Clara's body encased in cement had shaken them in ways they could not put into words. In the end, the case of Clara Hawthorne became a chilling reminder of how evil can hide in plain sight. Damon had been family. He had shared meals, stories, and laughter with the very people he would later devastate. His actions did more than just take a life. They poisoned the foundation of trust within an entire family and scarred a community forever. For Brenton, the memory of Clara lived on not only in grief, but as a warning of how betrayal can come from the place least expected.